All right. What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another Serious Angler podcast powered by our friends over at X2 Power Batteries. As always, I'm your host, Bailey Agbrett. And unfortunately, we are captainless today. We are without Andy, but we have a great show today. Mr. Justin Largen, who is joining us here from good old Lake Hartwell, which I am extremely jealous by. But the good news is, if you're listening to this episode, hopefully it means I'm fishing. I'm take half the day, go out fishing for the first time in New York this spring. Super excited about it. Wish I could be riffraffing about this stuff with Andy right now, but Andy is have a lot of stuff going on, so he could not make it today. He will be back soon. He might miss a couple shows here coming up, but nonetheless, we will have people subbing in as co-hosts. You guys are still stuck with my annoying voice, so you guys are stuck with me, but I promise our guests that we'll have on will make up for it. But today's going to be a great show again. Have Justin on here, talk a little kayak fishing, kind of a little bit of like kind of hinting for you guys here as we have something cool, something new coming along down the pipe here later this summer. And that's all I'm going to let on. Just know that there's something new and big on the horizon. But kind of going to really talk some kayak fishing nitty gritty here. And I'm excited for that. It's been a little while on Serious Angler that we've had someone from the kayak realm on the show. Honestly, I think it's probably been maybe a month and a half or so. I think Jordan Marshall might have been our last kayak show. But I think I don't have much news for you guys this weekend. I know the Do It Molds 25% off sale for the crankbait blanks and such is going on till Sunday. So if it's past Sunday the 16th, you listen to this now, unfortunately the sale's over. But if not, you're in luck. You guys can go take advantage of that. And of course, head over to our friends at Omnia Fishing, who are always running some sales, it seems, nowadays. They just keep pumping out 25% off this, that, and this. So go check that out. Use our code, save yourself some money on some fishing tackle. And then something else cool that we pre-alluded and we showed off in some previous episodes is the new line of Blackfish gear that just dropped. And I am excited because my package of stuff is on the way. Some new, some Swift pattern sun hoodies, which you guys know we talk about sun hoodies all the time. Like if it's not winter, I have a sun hoodie. I have my Achigan brand sun hoodie on now as we speak. We'll plug for the boys over there, but highly encourage you guys to go check that out. And they just have they just dropped some new Rage boots, the new waterproof boots that, speaking of kayak fishing, this is like right up like our kayak folks alley. If you guys need some waterproof boots, Blackfish Gear just dropped the new Rage boot, and they're pretty freaking snazzy because there's like I've used Extra Tough for so long, and the one complaint I always had was these soles there's literally is no sole in the shoe, and these Rage boots actually have a lot of cushion to them, so I'm pretty hyped about that. But enough talking about that. Without further ado, let's get on our guest for today, Mr. Justin Largen. What's going on, man?
Not too much, Bailey. How are you?
I'm good, man. I'm starting to get a workout here because since the Classic, I forgot my mic stand with Deacon, who's over in Colorado. Actually, he's in California right now for the Western Shootout, and so I've been holding my mic for like the past 2 weeks. So I'm kind of getting a bicep workout, man.
That's a good little burn there after a while, I imagine.
These are kind of like they're a few pounds, man. Like they're not a light deal. So after a while, it kind of gets like you see me start switching hands. I'm sitting there like getting tired. It's like whoever said podcasting wasn't a workout.
You got to get another one to balance it out.
Yeah,
do shadow boxing,
dual wielding. Yeah, that's right. That won't mess up the audio channels at all. Oh, that's good. But dude, Lake Hartwell, you hyped or what?
I am. I got out there. I've never been here before, but it reminds me a lot of a lake back home, Smith Mountain Lake. It's twice the size. I think it's 50,000 acres or something. So it's massive. I did get a chance last year. The Bass Kayak Series went down to, I guess it was Anderson, and we fished the lake below this Richard Russell. Mm-hmm. And I had a good tournament there. That kind of kickstarted my season last year. And this is, at least from what I've seen of it so far, it reminds me a lot of that lake. I mean, it's on the same system, just, one lake up. But it's that lake with docks is what it seems like. That lake was real remote, kind of You had some standing timber, but it was mostly just, wooded shorelines, and I really didn't see many houses. But this place is, yeah, it's got some nice homes on it.
Yeah, say Doc's galore on Hartwell.
Yeah.
It that is like so talk. We're gonna get to this in a little bit, but like one of the things I really want to talk about that we cannot, as kayak anglers, stress enough is the weight of strategy when it comes to especially practice, especially if you only have a couple days of practice, like on a body of water that size. Like you can't just fire up your 250 and go buzz a whole bunch of water. Like our decision to go fish where we do is it's a much higher added weight to where we go test out.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you better be doing some map study and some prep, and then you just kind of got to know in the back of your head that if you do make a move, like a big move, you're gonna, you're basically giving up a ton of fishing time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So my strategy, I think for this one's going to be just kind of stay in one section of the lake. I kind of like what I saw today, and I think I'm just going to stay relatively close to that. There's a couple ramps in the general area, and if I do move, I'm not going to have to drive an hour to get there.
That's good.
That's the plan anyway. But
Yeah, I did my first ever like in a Hobie event, take out and go launch somewhere else type of deal at Santee. And dude, like it was only like a 15-minute drive, but I was just like the whole time sitting there like, what am I doing? What am I doing? Because I'm freaking out thinking because you're losing fishing time because you're driving.
oh yeah,
And it's just like it's just a weird feeling. There's a whole different strategy that comes to preparing your kayak to be lighter that day, like in the first spot in the morning. That way it's an easier pick up and go, like throw it in the truck type of deal, or if you got trailer, that type of thing. It's got a whole different added strategy, which we're going to dive into that in a little bit. I don't want to, because I know as soon as we start talking about this, we're going to go down that rabbit hole. But because this is your first time on Serious Angler, I want to throw it back all the way to the beginning of how did this lifelong obsession begin and who's at fault for getting you started on this journey?
I was thinking about it the other day actually. Dad definitely took my siblings and I when we were real little. And I grew up in North Carolina, small town Lincolnton, actually, same place Hank Cherry's from. We moved to Virginia when I was 9, but my dad had access to these a couple of farm ponds and took us out there, and we caught some sunfish, and I don't think we ever actually caught a bass. I think that we had one on one time, and we were using a little Zebco push button stuff, and they broke it off. But yeah, that was the kind of the first fishing memories that I have, and I never really got super hooked then. I enjoyed it; it was fun, but I think I was a little older. I was probably 12 when I really got the bug, and I think I remember back. My younger brother and I had a babysitter when we were, I think I was maybe 3 or 4, and he was an avid fisherman. He had a little John boat, and I remember we'd be in their house, and he'd have rods on the wall, just the vertical rod mount. And I remember the smell of man's jelly worms. I didn't remember it until I think I was maybe like 12 or 13, and I bought a pack for like $1 at Walmart. And I was like, when I smelled it, I remembered all his tackle from his house from when I was a little kid. But I don't even know what show it was. I was watching some show and just remember thinking it was really cool, these guys catching bass. And then once I kind of started diving into it sort of on my own, I had sort of some basics of how to catch fish. Dad was a trout guy, so he would take my brothers and I, and we'd catch trout once we were in Virginia. Well, he would catch trout. We would watch and catch a lot of trash fish.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I was about 12 when I really just sort of got sucked into it. And I'd go to the library, and at that point, I think there was Outdoor Life, Bassmaster. There were a handful of magazines, and I would go, read everything they had. The only books they had were like these old, like 1970s and 80s books. I think is Dick Sternberg. Does that sound right? I remember it was like an In Fisher. I think In Fisherman maybe bought the rights to it or something, but there were these big, like hardcover books, had lots of pictures. And I remember they had several of those at our local library, and I don't know how many times I read through that stuff. But
Yeah,
yeah, I was about 12.
yeah, dude. There's one of the coolest conversations I think I've ever had was talking with Ken Duke, who's, for the folks who know, is very heavily prevalent in the fishing industry, and I'm very fortunate to call him one of my mentors now. And it's like when he showed me some of the coolest, like from a writing standpoint, information that was actually written down, tracked, put into a book that you could buy still. Dude, it's super cool. I dropped a few $100s on just bass fishing books. So I've made my way through all of them, but it's cool when people bring up like brand, like you mentioned. I have never heard of that before, so now my ears are like ringing of like, hey, go find that online and go buy it. Like the whole bass fishing history stuff, completely nerded out on all of that. But were you an in fisherman kid growing up?
Was I what?
And in fisherman, like did you
Oh,
watch or not watch? Did you read all that? Get the news magazine, all that jazz?
I didn't. I think at one point I remember subscribing to it, but I never really like I didn't keep the subscription. Like Bassmaster from the time I was probably 13 to now. I mean, it's whatever that is, 20 plus years I've been getting Bassmaster. And man, you want to talk about a way to fuel a tackle addiction is, open that up and see all the new toys like just nonstop that
Mm-hmm.
are constantly being developed. It's man, I feel like I've got to be one of the top spenders, like on the tackle warehouse. Like I want to see like a ranking, like who's the top 10 guys, because I feel like I've spent more money over the last 15 or 20 years on fish and tackle.
I'd be
Definitely not.
very curious to see that. That might honestly be a question. And we work with Omnia Fishing, and I might pose that question to them and be like, are you one allowed legally to dispose of this information? But two, like top 10, whether it's like bi-monthly, bi-weekly or like annually, like who are the spenders? Not names, but I mean, I would be cool to know the names. Like if you could see where you yourself ranked on Tackle Warehouse, but be like, how much are these people spending? Because I'm so curious, dude. How much money is going into this stuff? Uh, but yeah, dude, I've been getting Bassmaster. I think so. I'm looking down on my shelf right now. I'm in some turmoil because I mentioned on the last show, my fiance and I were moving. We're getting a new place, and I'm like, do I bring all of the magazines that I've literally kept since 2016? Like, do I bring them or do I throw them away? Is it time to throw them away? Because like I don't touch them after I read them the one time, but I like just collect them now. So it's
I had to stop because I just had too many. And like once I moved a few times and I realized there's only so much stuff you can take. And I have
yeah.
so much fishing tackle that I would haul from place to place that it just, yeah, those, I got a lot of respect for guys. Like I've heard Mike Iaconelli kept all his old ones. I I've never had a place big enough to keep
Right.
all that stuff. I mean, even just the other books. Like I know I have at least at one point I had a copy of his book. I had the Jimmy Houston book where he's
Mhm.
kissing the fish on the cover. I know I had at least one of Bill Dance. I think I had a couple of Kevin Van Dam's books. There's one Homer Circle.
Mm.
I had that one, and I don't even know if I have all that stuff anymore. I've moved so many times over the years.
Yeah.
I've got the books. The book box just tends to stay closed somewhere.
Yeah. Now with this shiny things called YouTube and the internet, it's hard to pick those books back up
Yeah,
for sure. But
it's
dude, where
definitely easy to get info now.
yeah, way the learning curve is definitely accelerated, but also so is the acceleration of misinformation is also ramped up too. Uh but saying that, dude, two-part question. One, when did the kayak happen? When did you get into the kayak? And then two, when did you start getting into the tournament realm of things?
The kayak thing I've been doing a while. I'm trying to think what year it would be because I know it's been more than 10. I'm trying to think. I graduated. I think I'd been working for a couple of years, and my first boat was a Bass Pro Shops Pond Prowler. Before that, I was the bank beater. I'd go to the little state parks where you could rent a rowboat or a canoe, or a little John boat with a motor on it. But when I got that first, little plastic John boat, that kind of opened up the world to me, and I could, go wherever I wanted. But after a couple years doing that, I think I saw Chad Hoover's videos and Jeff Little's videos just on YouTube. And, they were talking about some of the advantages. You could get into backwater places, and they were light and portable. And that pond prowler, I mean, it probably wasn't that much heavier than my Hobie, but it was bulky. And then by the time you throw that big trolling motor on it and those, I was dumb. I had two lead acid batteries on that thing. So, I mean, I had it weighted down.
Oh, man. Yeah,
I had
you're
one
sinking.
I had one for the trolling motor. And then I would literally it was so cool to me. Like everybody, you see these tournament guys holding up two fish, they're big fish at the tournament. And so I was like, well, I have to have a live well. And I literally converted one of those coolers. I guess it was an Igloo. It was probably, I don't know, 20, 22 inches on the inside. But I would literally take a bilge pump and pump water into that thing. So it's me in this sagging little boat that I've got 50 pounds of water in at least. I've got those gigantic motors, and then I've got the bilge pump, circulating water, basically a little do-it-yourself live well. And I'd catch fish and stick them in there and sit on the cooler and then fish. And, at the end of the day, two big fish.
Oh, my God.
And I did that for the longest time. But eventually I just got, I kind of started feeling, I was like, it's not good for the fish. So, obviously I don't do that anymore. But I got to a point where I was like, all that stuff, it would take me so long, and it was such work just to get that pond prowler off the car, in the water, load everything, hook everything up. It took a lot of time. So the kayaking thing seemed cool to me. So I ended up picking up, I think Chad and Jeff were both on the Wilderness Systems pro staff at the time. So I picked up a Wilderness Systems Commander, a 12-foot version. And I think it was about a year later, I moved. A couple of friends from college and I were renting a place in Alexandria, and it was about a year after I'd gotten into the kayak fishing, and I only remember that because I had a yard sale and I got rid of a bunch of crap, and I was looking at that boat and I was like, I haven't touched it. Literally the entire year I didn't touch that thing. It might even have been more than a year, and I pretty much from there on it was just kayaking for me. I did some fish as a co-angler and a couple little BFL deals, but when it was, me fishing, a majority of what I was doing, it's been out of kayak that was at least maybe 2010, maybe. It's been a while.
Yeah. So you've seen it really progress a lot, from the early stages where it was quite honestly what we could call it a mess. And I'd say it's very well put together now. Obviously, there's more strides to be taken to improve, but back then, holy moly, was it a mess? It was awesome though. It was super cool because it's a brand new thing.
And guys, basically, we really owe those of us who are in it now really owe those guys like Chad and Jeff, and I know there's a bunch more guys like Drew who have the ones that innovated and came up with all the things. Hey, we need this. Hey, we need this. That's why we have a lot of the cool features on these kayaks now. I remember getting in the first time I ever fished out of a kayak. My family was at the beach, and I remember just going into this little inlet in South Carolina and catching redfish out of it. It was so much fun, but it was uncomfortable. It was a sit-in kayak. There was no rod holder. It was just, you're kind of sitting in water. You've got one little tackle box in your lap. There was only so much stuff you could take, and there wasn't, you're blowing around in the wind, all the stuff that we have now. The anchor line, the anchor wizard, the power pole stuff. Even simple stuff like rod holders. When I got into it, that there was, I don't want to make it sound like I got in when there was nothing. But there's been a lot of innovation over the last few years.
Yeah.
It's pretty cool to see. And I've been like, I don't know. I guess I'm reluctant to change. I'm always like on the back end of all the advances. I've only had a pedal kayak for this is year number 3. I think 2021. I bought a pedal drive, and I've just
Wow.
paddled before that. And I got it. And I'm like, you idiot! This thing is so nice. You could have had this for so many years,
Yeah.
so many days when I could have, where it was just nasty wind. And I was like, well, I'm not going out there because all you do is paddle up to where you want to fish, make a cast, get pushed back, paddle up. I mean, you spend your whole day
I was
paddling.
miserable.
And I'm just like, why did you could have been so much more efficient.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just now getting into the motor scene. I'm still getting comfortable with a motor. I tried to do my own foot steering, and it didn't work quite as well as I would have liked. So I've got one side sticky. I've got to redo it.
Isn't that what I think we were talking about that as I was like trying to swat Red Wasp off me at Sanders Cooper?
Yeah. I got some tubing, but I just some stuff off Amazon to try to basically replace, at least because the what I was doing, it's hard to. It's like you stretch that tubing and hold it with the vice grips, and then melt the end so it kind of snaps shut. Well, once you cut it, there's not enough left to actually feed it all the way through again. So I've got to get the tubing. I think what the stuff that I got off Amazon wasn't exactly the right thing, but I think it'll work. I just got to actually find the time to do it and
Right.
And not fish.
Yeah.
That's the part.
Yeah, I think that's the one thing that is, it's a similar deal, but also kind of its own creative art per se that's different from the bass boat side. Is that kayak fishing is very DIY, but like it's an added sense because like you're drilling into plastic where one wrong move and you're going to sink. Where like with a boat, it's like, we could fill this, like we can fix it for the most part. You have a giant 21 foot of fiberglass for the most part that, it's not as added a sense of like, well, the smaller piece of plastic. There's a heightened sense of like what can go wrong here if I don't do this right the first time. And there's many people that have messed it up the first through third times, and but on the same track mind, it is so unique on its own from a DIY sense in that, like, for the most part, people on the bass boat side need to go buy products that are already being sold from different brands that have something established that's being, mass produced. Where kayak stuff, you can go to the hardware store and jerry rig something with a 2x4 to make rod holders, or I mean, shoot, these days you could probably have something that's a 2x4 to hold your forward facing sonar at this point. But like, that's how it was. I mean, I think you could speak to that way better than I could. I mean, really, I got into kayak fishing heavy in 2015, 16. But I mean, you mentioned 2010. I mean, 2010, I feel like 2010 to like 17, 18 was like the prime age of DIY for kayaks before stuff was like being more mass produced to be able to have like the different parts and mounts to do some of the stuff that we're doing today.
Yeah. And I think if I'd had a pedal drive, if I'd had a motor earlier, I might have appreciated some of those changes. But a lot of that stuff, when it was just me basically, I'd throw the kayak, I'd leave it up on top of the car, and I'd get off work and drive to some of these creeks off the Potomac and just throw in and go. And I'd have 2 or 3 rods and what do they call the old before catch?
The hog trough.
Yeah. I'd grab the hog trough. I'd have a boga grip, box of baits, but I mean, real lightweight, and just go back and fish a couple hours in a creek. And a lot of fun. And it was so much quicker to be able to do that. Like I still regret selling that Commander. I think I would still use it at times today if I had it, but it had kind of like a padded side on it. You could throw it on your shoulder. I think it weighed like 65 or 70 pounds. And it was just, it was plenty stable, but it was just really easy to kind of, I mean, there was some, the GW Parkway. It basically runs like from Mount Vernon up to DC, and a lot of people will bike and walk the trail, but there's a couple places you can pull off and park, and there's some places that there's not really a ton of boat ramps, so it's difficult to access some stuff in there. But I could literally walk down this steep riprap bank with that on my shoulder, and put in at places where it would have taken me 2 hours to paddle to get to where I was putting in, to basically get access to some places that, it's great if you got a boat, you can, zip up and down the river, but the kayak really opened up a lot of places for me. And it's just, there's something different about being that close to the water versus being up in a boat. I mean, if I had a bass boat and if I could afford one, I'd definitely fish out. But
ditto.
but man, it's something about it. It's really fun being in a kayak. It's like an extra challenge. It's different. It's the same, but it's different.
Right. Yeah. It's very natural. It's less intrusive in regards to like the equipment that you use. Like you're not hearing a trolling motor going the whole time while you're trying to, fish shallow, that type of deal. Like, and you can make it so you have zero electronics. It's you, a hunk of plastic, and a pedal drive, maybe if that, a paddle and a rod, and you can make it as obnoxious as you want, and you can make it as literally obsolete as you want. Where I mean, I say that I literally have two graphs forward facing sonar and a Torpedo on mine. So I say that, but at the same point in time, like I can also launch with just my kayak, just a paddle, and just a rod, and catch just as many fish. That being said, but I'm kind of curious from your standpoint with the upbringing you had. Starting at bank beating for a while, getting into the kayak, being in the kayak side for such a long time. Like, how has that shaped you as an angler from a skill set standpoint? Like, what's your confidence? What would you label yourself as?
I'm definitely simple, kind of old school. I'd call it. I like fishing super shallow. I get myself in trouble a bunch of times trying to look at fish. Bed fishing tournaments. I've had some really good finishes in them, but I've also, like even today, the last thing you should be doing practicing for a tournament is sitting on a bed fish for a long time. But that was what I wanted to catch today, and I got sucked into it. It was making me mad that I couldn't catch it, and I was like, "No, I'm going to get this fish."
It was personal.
Oh yeah, and that it will even still, as long as I've been doing it, it bites me in the butt sometimes. But I love fishing shallow. I love looking at them, and not even necessarily just bed fishing. I like. There's times where you can go in some of these creeks on the Potomac and see cruisers, swimming over the top of grass edges, and I love looking at them. I love catching fish in places that people think they aren't, like where it's too shallow, there's nothing up there, or going into places that have a bad reputation. Like there's one particular lake in Northern Virginia where I lived for many years that the state kind of will come up with rankings for these small bodies of water, and then some of the bigger ones based on their electroshock stuff. And then I think they also looked at how many, citation fish people were reporting at different places. And this particular lake, they basically said was like the worst lake in the state, or one of them. And I take my kayak in there, and, I wouldn't catch giants. I think the biggest I ever caught was 5, but I could go in there and not see another boat the whole day, not see anybody, and just me kind of and nature. And, I had some days where you catch 15 pounds, and for a place where they say there's no, they'd use electro gear and shocked up a couple of fish that were 15 inches. So for me to, I've got multiple days where I put up 15 pounds in that place. So that's the kind of stuff I like to get into. And flipping and pitching if the water's dirty, and spinner baiting, just I like looking at stuff, trying to make, accurate casts. And I love seeing the strikes. Electronics is kind of my big Achilles heel. I've not spent nearly enough time, but the Potomac ruined me. Like you can catch fish on that place shallow in the middle of the summer. So I'd fish a lot of these other, local lakes in the spring when the fish were up shallow. And then I'd be like, all right, well, the fish are deep here, and rather than forcing myself to figure out how to catch them in those places, I just be like, hey, let's go to the Potomac and throw a frog. And it's fun, but
Yeah.
sometimes, tournament fishing now, I'm kicking myself a little bit for not being as versatile as I should be.
Yeah, I hear
But I
that.
had a lot of fun. So,
Well, this is good in a sense because it makes for great conversation. And this is like something similar to like with Drew Gregory when he's on the show, or even when I travel with my buddy Zach Hall all the time for Hobie events. Is that the thing? The thing in similar is that I love to be offshore and I love using my electronics. Where like I'm comfortable getting up shallow and like power fishing, but like my confidence really lies with like a Nico rig, drop shot, something a little bit more finessey, deeper water, more offshore. That's the kind of thing. So this will make for great riffraff conversation. Like with my buddy Zach and Drew, obviously Drew, that's completely polar opposite style of fishing. Where it's like those are guys I'm super comfortable traveling with because I know there's zero chance that we're gonna get on each other's stuff from a tournament standpoint. Where it's like I think if you see Drew in the middle of the lake, you don't have to worry about him because he's probably straight lost. Uh, but it's good though. I mean, I think in a sense, it gives you something to work for. Whereas I feel like some people, I'm trying to figure out how to way to word this. Where when you're on the lower, like on the incline of the learning curve, and you're trying to do everything, it's hard to get good at something. If that makes any sense. Where I see some people that
oh, yeah.
do that, and they're doing it. It's nothing wrong. It's more like they want to learn as much as they can too fast. If that makes any sense. Where they're not taking a chance to be like, they're like, okay, I caught a few fish in a jerkbait. Now I'm gonna go try this, and it's like where it's like, hey, get comfortable with it, then you can kind of start learning something else where it's, I don't know, that's going to begin us down a whole different other rabbit hole. But I think the way you describe though, that is your forte of fishing is one that is very strong in regards to kayak fishing, where it's not like, we're seeing live type of deal winning at every single event right now. It's definitely making its case and it's making its entrance into
Oh,
the
yeah.
deal, but like the guy that can get up shallow is still a guy that is winning or doing very, very well at these events. And you're seeing multiple different anglers do it. I think I'm trying to think how many people maybe last year that would have won off of forward facing zone. I know Rolando won off forward facing. I don't know how many you remember last year, at least like Hobie wise, that won off
Mm,
strictly forward facing sonar.
I know I've heard Ewing talk about it a bunch.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if it necessarily played into his wins. Um,
Right.
Rolando was the one that I knew of, and I know his at least day two. I think at Caddo even. I would never have thought somebody would use forward facing on Caddo, but yeah, he that dude's a wizard.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know that it necessarily is winning them all, but I feel like the guys that know how to use it are definitely some of the most consistent ones out there. It's like if you and I'm the last person to be talking about it because I've never used it.
Oh,
I've
really? So you haven't even gone down the train yet?
no, I mean I'm still like I'm so far I'm so far behind stuff that like I think my unit is a 7 inch and it's got side scan, but the display is so small that I can't make stuff out, so I don't use it.
Right.
And I know that's like, I'm handicapping myself. I should splurge and get a 9 or an 11 or whatever, something fancier. But the I mean I'm trying. I can't even remember what is it? Triple shot reveal or something. It's like a Lowrance
Yeah.
reveal, I think.
Yeah.
And I only got that model because I wanted the mapping. Like I wanted to be able to drop waypoints.
Mm-hmm.
But even with waypoints, like I don't have a touch screen. So it's like I'm having a like old school cell phone, like
Oh man, yeah, and that's like the only perk Lowrance has going for him is that it's touchscreen. He didn't even get the touchscreen model.
Yeah, it's not even a touchscreen. So yeah, I know that's something that I've got to work on. Like I've got to just, especially like I said it last summer, and I'll say it again. For this summer, I'm going to get out there and get better with the offshore fishing with electronics. It's just, these tournaments. It's not just a springtime deal, and I definitely noticed last year when I got out of my comfort zone a little bit on some of these places, it showed, and I had some tougher events. So I've got to work on that skill set, sort of build skill and confidence with electronics. About the only time that I really use it for more than water temp and depth. Where was it? St. Clair, I think. My first time over there,
Yeah.
I got a chance, to just basically throw on a drop shot and catch a big smallmouth.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't necessarily seeing the fish, but I would see the grass clumps and just pitch at the grass. And I thought I was, oh, look at me, I'm an electronics wizard.
Yeah.
That's as fancy as I've been able to get with electronics, and I know it's hurting me, or it's not helping me anyway.
Yeah.
But it's just one of those things. It's hard for me to get out of the backwaters and the dirt and like force myself to actually do that.
Yeah, well, I think with this conversation of forward-facing sonar or technology in general, you hear about the bass boat side talking about it, and they're like saying how it's becoming such a huge part of the game for anglers, which it is. I won't argue that, but I think with kayak fishing specifically, the guy that's able to get way back in that dirt, find that juice that boats can't get into, is still going to play because that stuff can play for 2 days, which is majority of all of our national scale events are 2 days, whereas a lot of these guys are fishing 4 days, if not, if you're on BPT, it's 6 days. And so it's a lot harder to make that backwater stuff hold up for that long. Whereas 2 days will always, I think, be able to play when it comes to that. If you know how to manage your fish, or you have more than one backwater area type of deal, I think it's always going to play on the kayak side of things. But I think you will see more people that get further dialed with the forward-facing sonar because it is a lot harder to use forward-facing sonar in the kayak than it is on a boat. Where if you look at it on a boat, you're standing up for one, and two, you're able to use your foot, so your hands free using your foot to use this deal. But in the kayak, you got wind that's pushing your kayak one way. It's moving it, say, to the right, but it's also spinning you at the same time. And you're worried about having the rod in your one hand, working your bait or trying to hold position on the bait. And the other hand is using your forward-facing sonar to keep such bait, especially in the wind, like in view, in picture, while you're also trying to work a cadence, like say you're using a jerk bait. So you have to almost like it's a science of like specifically talking about my case with like a 360 drive. Like I have it at a certain angle where I can use my feet to somewhat keep me in place against the wind in a directional standpoint. And also I have to like use one hand. It's like the trick of being able to reel one-handed. You know what I mean? You know what I'm talking about? Where you'll be able to pick up slack, especially like throwing a jerk bait, and be able to use your other hand to keep your forward facing in the cone, like your bait in the cone. It's a whole like it is way more challenging to use it in the kayak, and I feel like if anything, it's another additive for specific conditions and specific fisheries that it's just another thing that's going to waste some people time. Where it might catch you fish, but you might just be so struggling to keep your bait like in view or too focused on using it in that standpoint where you might be just fine putting the forward facing sonar away and fishing that exact same spot how you're going to do it. Just you don't need to look at them. But I feel like that's a human nature thing though. People are like, oh man, I gotta see him though. Like I gotta be able to look. You know what I mean? Like I think that's part of it. But I think it's always gonna be part of kayak fishing. I think there's, to your point too, like the people that have it and know how to use it well and efficiently are seeing a big advantage to using it, even just from a castability standpoint of like making a higher percentage cast a little bit more accurate. So
yeah, and at least I'm guessing that it's helpful to see, like, actually be able to, like, I hear people talk about using a jerk bait and actually be able to watch. You make your cadence and you can actually see the fish react. where, I mean, unless you're fishing some super clear water, you can't see that with your eyes necessarily. And I
Yeah.
think that could be, I could see some huge advantage there. And I've heard about, who was it? I think it was Matt Herron. I listened to a Bass University talk where he was talking about going down, I think, a canal with the forward face and pointed out to the side, and he can actually see which docks have brush piles on them, which ones have fish on them, and he's just marking them as he's going without even casting. And his logic was, well, if I don't even want to show them a bait. If I show them a bait, they bite it. Maybe they won't bite it during the event. But just something like that, like a way to maybe make yourself more efficient in practice. That I could see that there's a ton of ways people could use it. I think what I would do is go out there and just drive around until I saw fish, and then sit on those fish until I got them to bite. I can see myself doing the same thing I do when I'm with my eyes looking for them, and then just getting sucked into the rabbit hole and chasing fish that won't bite all day.
That is the one downside, especially when you get right into it, is you look and you're like, oh my God, there's fish everywhere. Like you see blobs and you're like, oh God, it's got to be a bass. You start casting, chasing it. And then you finally able to see it, like, well, there goes in the shallow water. You're like, oh, that's a carp. Never mind. So it's like it's a hard learning curve to like learn species. But you can certainly learn species, one, and how they set up, two, and you can actually see for the most part their tails and how they swim. Like there's small, minute differences in like carp and big bass. But to your point though, it is a really, really good tool to learn about bass. It's also a great tool from efficiency standpoint of like, I can go, there's a school of fish in front of me. I could throw an A-rig over top of them. They don't chase it, or maybe they chase it for a little bit and they don't actually eat it. Like maybe I need to change the color of like my middle swim bait type of deal, or add a little chartreuse on one of my middle swim bait, something to get those fish to trigger to commit on one. Or I'm throwing a jerk bait and it's not getting down. I need to get it 1 foot lower than what I'm getting it to, that type of deal. Like it can help you make those changes, which I think is super crucial, even in and of itself, whether you're watching those fish eat or not. You're able to make those split time decisions because you can see how they behave real time, which I think is super cool. Personally, I geek out about it every time I use it. But dude, I'm kind of curious. So, from your standpoint, with how you fish, how, like, especially being a hardcore tournament guy, how do you approach practice with your style of fishing?
One of the biggest things for me, at least, well, I'll preface it with this. I feel like my practice sort of evolves. Like I don't necessarily do it exactly the same every time. I'm constantly sort of trying to tweak it, and like to me the big debate is, do you stick fish or not? And in my head, it makes sense to not catch fish. A lot of the fish that I'm finding it's a resident fish. You're back in some backwater or in a creek. It's not necessarily the stuff that I'm throwing at. It's not necessarily a piece of cover that's got a whole group of them on it. I'm not fishing for schoolers. I'm fishing for singles. So I try not to stick them in practice. I might get one in an area or two in an area, and then I'll start shaking them off. And then like for one like this, where it's a sight fishing deal, I might actually stick a fish just to make sure that I'm not, big eyeing them or underestimating them, just to get a better idea. Because sometimes just that different tint in the water. I looked at a 5-pounder in California, what I thought was a 5-pounder in California. It took me a solid probably 45 minutes to catch it, and it was a 9. Like I could not figure out why that thing was, like how that fish was that strong. And when I actually got my hand on it and lifted it up, it's like, whoa, that's why. So I've done it the other way probably more often, where you see a fish and it's in 6 inches of water, and you're like, oh, that's a 3-pounder, and it's a pound and a half or 2. Yeah. So I like to catch a couple just to get an idea, but I try not to beat them up. And I've kind of gone back and forth like there's a bunch of tournaments where I'll have several spots on a map. Like, okay, I like this particular creek arm, and I like this other creek arm on the other end of the lake. I'll fish some clean stuff. I'll fish some dirty stuff. And I don't know that there's necessarily a right way to do it, because I've had some where I try a bunch of different things and eventually I stumble across something and figure it out. And I've had other ones where I just kind of end up sort of lost. I try a bunch of different things, different ends of the lake, and don't really come up with anything. Or I've got a couple of spots, but like we were talking about earlier, for me to like there was a Smith Lake last year.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still kicking myself for this. I had a spot, this one little sort of back of a creek. I had another one that was a solid hour just the driving, not pedaling back to the ramp, not factoring in the unloading. Then when you get to the other spot, reloading, and that I ended up not running because I was just like, it's an hour. I'm kicking myself for that, because I feel like if I had run, I would have had a better finish. I stayed in an area after it kind of got beat up. After I caught fish, a bunch of other people caught fish, and yeah, so I've kind of tried to not do that as much. The last couple of them, I've tried to let me just stay in one general section of the lake and try to figure it out. But I still I don't know that that's necessarily the right way either.
Right.
I think there's advantages and disadvantages to each. Like, there's definitely something to be said for seeing a bunch of different parts of the lake. I've definitely had tournaments where I've spent, not wasted, but spent a day just driving and looking at ramps. Okay, what color's the water in here? I mean, and you know this. It's stuff that looks one way on a map, and it doesn't necessarily look that way when you actually like when you actually get there and look at it. It's like, whoa, the terrain is different than I imagined, or the water will be a little bit different color, or some places that just don't look very good on mapping look a lot cooler when you actually get there, and vice versa.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I feel like my practice strategy changes a lot. The biggest thing I try not to do, though, is be the guy that goes in there and puts up
wins practice.
yeah, because I've done that. Well, I don't know that I would have won practice, but I've had those days where you go out there and you feel really good. And I did it on the Potomac one time, and I'm still kicking myself. It was a perfect, the way that the weather set up for that event. I think I fished 3 days beforehand, and I hit a bunch of different spots all over that river. And I think every place I went, it was about as good as I'd ever seen the fishing. And I was like, all right, well, let me just stick one and make sure, make sure they're, it's a decent sized fish. And yeah, it's an 18. Maybe just make sure I wasn't a fluke and see if we stick another one. And you do that very many times, and at the end of the day, you've stuck a bunch of fish, and it's I've definitely made that mistake before. So
yeah,
I try not to do that.
Right. And I feel like that's such a tournament learning curve, is learning to not throttle through all of your fish, as enticing as it is. Like, there's nothing worse than knowing that stretch, like whether it's a shallow stretch or you're fishing offshore and you can see them on electronics or whatever, and you're like, I know I could just smash them right now. But you're like fighting the inner urge to do so. And then the worst part is when you do that and you're like, you feel good about it, you leave them, they're there, you come back tournament day and they're gone. You're like, man, I could have just crushed them and it wouldn't have meant nothing. Like, your inner angler is just like beating you up.
Oh yeah, I've done that with. I've had, sight fishing will burn you about as quick as anything, and I've had where a stretch of spawners where you find just a stretch where there's a bunch of big females pulled up, and you lay off of them. A lot of times I'll mess with a fish just to get a better idea of whether it's catchable. But a lot of times I'm just using a screw lock, not even a hook. Right. So you shake off this fish. But I had a tournament where I shook off 2 or 3 in this one stretch that were, I think they were over 5. And then I came back for the tournament, they were gone, and I'm just like, I could have had a monster day and a lot of fun, and instead, and even Santee this last Hobie was kind of like that for me. I laid off a bunch of fish, and I didn't figure it out until Friday that it was sort of the tail end of the spawn. I was thinking maybe there was at least the section of lake that I was in. There was a bunch of fry. I'd seen a bunch of fish earlier in the week, and then when I'm going back on Thursday, I wasn't seeing them, and then on Friday, same deal. It was just I didn't figure it out until too late, but I think I was the stretch where I was, the bite was going away from me, not coming to me.
Right. Yeah.
That's a whole nother. I could talk for an hour just about how.
Yeah.
How, I stuck one fish in practice and it was giant, and laid off other fish, and then they're gone.
Right. Yeah. Always happens that way.
How it goes.
Always. Yeah. Well, dude, we're about to close out here. We got 2 more questions for you. We'll wrap this thing up. But folks, appreciate y'all tuning into this one. You guys are actually going to hear much more of Justin coming here. We're going to try to get him on, help us co-host here when Andy's out. But dude, 2 questions for you to wrap this sucker up, and one of them being favorite kayak tournament fishery in the country.
Ooh, that's tough. There's so many good ones.
Really is hard to pick.
I probably got to say Harris Chain, just because
really
I've had 2 really good tournaments there. I feel like it would somehow be wrong for me to say any place other than there.
Okay, yeah. Old Faithful.
But yeah, I mean, I love shallow grass. I love any grass. Shallow water fisheries, places you can power fish, punch, and that's Florida. And yeah, I like the Harris Chain.
Okay, I dig it. All right, so last question for you, and we'll let you go here. Is if you could sit down and have a steak and a beer with 3 different individuals that don't have to be fishing industry, fishing related. They could be alive now or 1,000 years ago. Doesn't matter. And the 3 individuals, steak and a beer. Who would you going to invite?
I'm gonna go George Washington for one. I remember I studied political science in college, and I remember just the amount of respect that I have for him and a bunch of the other founders and framers, just the vision that they had for the country and sort of what they built is just incredible to me. I think it'd be really cool to kind of sit down with them and see what they were actually like.
See how disappointed they would be in us now.
I don't want to go there.
Yeah.
I would definitely enjoy hearing, just to me, that'd be really cool.
Yeah.
I think, and not to get too deep into history and politics and stuff, but at the same time, when you got most rulers, most people that are in positions of authority are trying to not give it up, and to have somebody that people want to elect to a 3rd term. I mean, he could have been president for life probably, and he said no, and basically set a precedent that everybody follows now. To me, that's different. Like, that's not something everybody does.
Yeah.
So he'd have to be one. I don't know why this popped into my head, but I'm thinking Carlos Hatchcock was a Marine sniper from the Vietnam era. And I remember reading his book. I think it was either high school or maybe one of my years of college. I was into military history stuff, and that dude, some of his story is amazing. I'd love to buy that dude a beer.
Heck yeah.
And I'm trying to think. I don't know. That's what, 2? You said 3.
Yeah. 3. One more.
I'll do somebody from the fishing world. I think it'd be cool to sit down with Bill Dance. Yeah, Bill Dance. I mean, any of the guys from that sort of, the guys that sort of built the sport. Yeah. I mean, Ray Scott, Hank Parker, and I'm leaving Roland Martin,
Jimmy,
and any of those guys.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be cool.
A lot of basically, two basically founding fathers, if you will, one of fishing, but one of one of the
Yeah,
United States. But yeah, I like that, dude. That's awesome.
yeah, the people that gave us the stuff that, at least the stuff that I like. So
Yeah, heck yeah, dude. Well, man, I appreciate you joining us. I know it's tournament week for you down there in Lake Hartwell. So good luck. Rest of practice. We'll be rooting for you this weekend. But obviously, for folks, if you guys are tuning into this, Justin's social media is down in the description, whether you're watching or you're listening to the episode. Make sure you guys go give him a follow. But what can anything else that people can look forward to, whether this weekend or beyond, from your standpoint, like YouTube or anything along the lines of that?
at some point, I'm gonna start running the GoPro and putting YouTube stuff up, but I haven't done it yet. So right now, it's just the Instagram. If people
So,
want to see me, but at some point, we'll have some video content out there.
So follow them until the YouTube stuff comes on.
Oh
And then,
yeah.
yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, dude, appreciate you. For folks, I have no closing notes for today. So, Justin, here, we're going to close it right out. But, folks, appreciate you guys joining in. Next Monday is our Lake Murray Fantasy Fishing Show. So make sure you guys come and tune in for that. We're going to go live 8 p.m. Eastern Monday morning. And then Tuesday night live with Steve Estes of Bass Fishing Electronics and Matt Becker. We're going to be talking some forward-facing sonar / just basic technology hacks. So, Justin, there you go. You want to get deeper into some electronics, that might be the show to tune into next Tuesday night at 8 p.m. Eastern as well. But, folks, appreciate you guys. Justin, thank you as always, man. And
Thanks for
we'll
having me.
see y'all next week. Peace.